What happened to the woman whose voice had once brought serenity to millions of people is something you won't believe to happen. At this moment, quiet encircled Tamela Mann, the gospel queen who had a way of singing hope into hearts that were broken. Her followers were profoundly concerned, as well as startled and perplexed. In the beginning, there were only whispers. There was nothing loud or official, but something didn't really feel right. Tamela was not posting as frequently as she had been in the past. Her vitality appeared to be different. Then after that, when it comes to social media, that one post was the only one that appeared. Sometimes silence is the loudest cry. The moment that everything began to shift was that moment. People started talking to one another. According to others, she appeared exhausted in her most recent performances. Some people were of the opinion that her grin no longer reached her eyes. In the life of a lady who was always in the spotlight, it was as if a shadow had slowly made its way into her existence. In a stealthy manner, her concerts were cancelled. Just some unexpected shifts, no major announcements to make. Her followers looked forward to receiving an explanation, but none was forthcoming. There is only quiet. What's more, the silence became even more audible with each passing day. As a singer, Tamela Mann was not like any other. People turned to her as a source of comfort during times of loss, such as funerals, breakups, sicknesses, and lonely evenings. Not only did her song "Take Me to the King" reach the top of the gospel charts, but it also made its way into people's hearts. Tamela has displayed her faith like a crown throughout her life. She was born in Texas and raised in a Christian household. In the realm of entertainment, her marriage to David Mann was regarded as one of the most stable and God-centered love tales that ever existed. It was said that she was powerful, deeply rooted, and brimming with grace. For this reason, when things started to seem strange, her admirers didn't just worry, they panicked. This is because when someone who is so powerful begins to show signs of weakness, people begin to wonder what exactly is going on. However, here comes the most surprising portion. There was more to this than just stress or a packed agenda. Within the confines of the locked doors, something considerably more serious was taking place. It was the night that everything came crashing down. There was a private gospel gathering, Tamela present. According to many who were present, she delivered a stunning performance that was heartfelt and strong, just as she usually is. On the other hand, when she exited the stage, she started to feel uneasy. Her stroll was more leisurely, her face appeared to be fair. After a few moments, she stopped breathing backstage. Panic spread as others began to scream. Immediately after her arrival, she was taken to the closest hospital, and within a few hours, her family issued a brief statement. There was a significant cardiac crisis that Tamela Mann had experienced. The condition of her was really serious. Permit me to tell you that this news did not merely hurt, it really crushed hearts. Fans all over the world who had previously relied on her voice to help them get through their darkest days were now praying for her to find the strength to face her own challenges. There was a brief period of silence on social media, which was followed by an explosion. There was a sudden influx of everything, including hashtags, photographs, videos, and messages. Suddenly, it seemed as if the entire gospel world had stopped breathing. Is she going to be okay? Was the question that everyone was asking their own version of, but nobody had a response to provide. At this point, things start to become interesting. As the news spread, additional information started to become available. A few individuals who had collaborated with Tamela in the most recent months began to express their opinions. They claimed that she had been putting too much pressure on herself. She was reportedly encouraged to take a vacation, but she did not want to let her supporters down, according to a source within the organization. She had been holding a lot of things to herself, both emotionally and physically, according to another person. And all of a sudden, the questions grew more profound. Is it possible that this was just a health concern, or has the pressure of always being strong and always showing up finally found its way to the surface? During the time when Tamela was battling for her life in the hospital, the outside world responded in a way that had never been seen before. Radio stations that broadcast gospel music halted their regular programming and began playing her songs over and over again. In front of hospitals, supporters lit candles while holding hands and softly sang the lyrics of songs that had previously provided them with solace. Churches all around the United States opened their doors to hold prayer vigils, with some of them remaining open into the night. Nevertheless, despite all of this devotion, Tamela's family remained silent during the entire process. There were people waiting, some with fear and others with optimism. The stillness was ultimately broken by her husband, David Mann, who sent a message that was brief but extremely devastating. We continue to cling to our religion. Not to panic, but to pray with us, please. A different impact was made by that single sentence. There was no publicity stunt involved here. It was a true event. In order to continue living, the woman who had previously offered her heart to the world was now relying on the prayers of the world. How I Stand with Tamela became a trending hashtag on the internet, and it quickly became widespread. The memories, the clips, and the photos. On the other hand, the videos that showed her singing with her eyes closed and her arms lifted as if she were not performing were the most emotionally impactful. It was a moment of devotion. Additionally, those songs were no longer only performances at this point. These things were essential. On the other hand, this is when things start to become even more personal and difficult. People started telling stories about Tamela, but not about her as an artist. Rather, they were about Tamela herself. There are tales of her hugging complete strangers after an event. I would stop in the middle of my travels to say, "God is with you," and pray for my supporters when I was walking through congested halls. Never was she merely a voice, rather she was a presence and a source of solace. And at this moment that presence was absent, and it seemed as though a portion of the globe had become less bright. Permit me to tell you that the most insane aspect was not the collapse itself. Rather, it was what individuals started remembering after it had occurred. Tamela had participated in an interview a few months earlier, during which she had briefly discussed the experience of feeling emotionally exhausted. While she was saying it, she had a smile on her face and handled it with grace. But now that clip has emerged and has affected people in a different way. Did she previously provide us with indications? Did we fail to notice her hushed sob? Behind the scenes, questions began to circulate at an alarming rate. When she was being pushed, was it too much? It was said by many who were close to the gospel industry that Tamela had been under pressure to preserve her brand, her tour schedule, and her image. So, despite the fact that she was not feeling well, she allegedly refused to cancel performances according to some people. An insider stated that she constantly prioritized the needs of others. She considered repose to be self-centered. Furthermore, if that was the case, then it is possible that the collapse was not just about her heart. It's possible that it was about bearing the burden of everyone else's suffering for an excessively long time. At this point, the plot took another unexpected turn. One of the articles that was published on a small gospel site questioned whether or not the individuals who were around Tamela had let her down. Have warning indicators been disregarded? Did the public's perception of her vigor take precedence over her actual state of health? Once upon a time, fans who exclusively complimented the gospel industry started asking some challenging questions. Did Tamela have the impression that she needed to be courageous no matter what? Did she feel that her quiet was encouraged? Something lovely began to take place, despite the fact that it was occurring in the midst of that storm of questions and suffering. Not only did individuals start telling stories about Tamela, but they also started telling stories about themselves. According to a post made by a mother, the only thing that helped me get out of bed after the death of my child was Tamela's music. The lyrics to the song, "Take Me to the King," were whispered by another man in a video that he released featuring his elderly mother lying in a hospital bed. These were not only followers, rather these were individuals whose lives had been altered, healed and touched, and at this moment, each and every one of them was providing that love back. However, there is still no complete update, no images, no videos, and nothing but silence. It was the kind of silence that caused one's heart to hurt, and everyone around the world waited, praying that Tamela was still fighting inside those hospital walls during this time. A new report from the Mann family finally arrived, which brought about an unanticipated change in the course of events. David Mann finally broke his quiet after several days by sending a brief and heartfelt note. "There is Tamela awake. While she is exhausted, she is still fighting. Each and every prayer has been heard. A wave of relief was felt all across the nation as a result of that single sentence. Many people shed tears, others applauded, and some even got down on their knees. To say that it was a full recovery would be an understatement, yet it was hope. In addition, for those individuals who had been holding their breath, it was as if they were finally able to breathe again. However, this is when things started to become even more emotional and peculiar. In the course of a local church gathering, a member of Tamela's immediate family disclosed that she had been humming melodies while she was in the hospital. "Yeah, I'm humming. In spite of the traumatic experience, in spite of the machinery and the physicians, her soul had not been destroyed." Someone murmured that she had not lost her ability to sing. That instant, that sentence has spread like wildfire across the internet, due to the fact that for someone like Tamela Mann, her song was more than simply music, it was her own being. And if she continued to hum, it meant that she was still engaged in combat. Exactly what sets this tale apart from others. There is more to it than merely surviving. What happens when the loudest voice in the room suddenly stops speaking is the subject of this piece, which is about the silence that occurs between the songs. Fans were made aware of the fact that the scenario had come dangerously close to becoming permanent in the midst of the rehabilitation process. Tamela might not have survived if she had arrived only 10 minutes later, according to the physicians, according to a gospel radio DJ who disclosed this information off the air. The time is 10 minutes. Fans were tormented by the narrow space that existed between life and death. For a lady who had provided the world with decades of strength, it nearly came to an end at a moment that was so fragile and so silent that it could have been ignored. Nevertheless, this is the bit that really caused folks to pause and think about it. Over the course of several years, Tamela had been fighting in silence behind the music. Interviews from the past are currently becoming viral. She discussed issues such as anxiety, despair, and challenges with weight, as well as the pressure that comes from the profession to constantly be the light. Her supporters were able to see the anguish that was hiding behind that grin, yet she handled it with elegance and a smile. A sudden change occurred in the sound of her songs. Each and every lyric, each and every breath, and each and every performance, as if it were not merely talent but rather survival. She had been singing through storms like we had never seen before, and the pressure was not something that originated out of thin air. People in the industry started speaking out, but they did so in a manner that was cautious, discreet, and honest. It was acknowledged by a few producers that Tamela had been overworked. The officials of the church who booked her confirmed that she never declined the invitation. She even prayed with each and every person that came to her, according to one of them. Sometimes, for hours at a time, we believed that it was simply being who she was. We had no idea what consequences it was having for her. At this point, the feeling of remorse began to take hold. Was the woman who gave everything taken away from her by the world to an excessive degree? However, the most bizarre aspect, the one that caused everyone to get the chills, was this. It was stated that Tamela had informed a friend a few days prior to her breakdown, "I'm tired in a way that I can't explain." At the time, it sounded like a typical bout of fatigue, including touring fatigue and work fatigue. Now, however, it seemed to be something more profound, something potentially harmful, as if her body had been muttering a cautionary note prior to the moment when it yelled. No one, not even Tamela herself, paid any attention to what she had to say. But even while she was getting better, folks continued to feel apprehensive. This was not merely a story about a comeback. A wake-up call was what it was. It is not for no reason that a voice like hers would become silent. There was a demand for a change. Something needed to be confronted. As the followers waited for further details, they did not simply pray. Rather, they started to think about the situation. Because if someone like Tamela Mann, who is so full of light, faith, and strength, could fall under the weight of it all, then what does it say about the way we treat the individuals that we consider to be strong? A more in-depth statement was finally released by the Mann family after several days of hushed conversations, prayers, and emotional remarks that quickly spread over social media. Over the course of her stay in the hospital, Tamela was under close supervision. The physicians confirmed what many people fear, but they also hoped to hear that she had survived a massive cardiac attack, which was a potentially fatal event they had anticipated. Now, however, is when things start to become interesting. Her journey to recovery would involve more than simply physical activity. Emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects would be involved. The very same woman who helped others find strength by guiding them through their own suffering was now having to learn to accept strength from other people. Moreover, this transition was humbling for someone like Tamela, who had always been on the side of faith that advocated for generosity. A family-like response was given by the gospel community. She received voice notes of support from artists whom she had previously taught. Singing in tribute to the woman who had previously elevated their spirits, choirs from all over the country, from the smallest towns to the largest cities, recorded her songs and brought them to the hospital. The words "You sang us through, now we stand for you" were written on signs that were displayed in front of the hospital by a group of teenage ladies who were members of a youth choir, and something holy took place in those seemingly insignificant and sincere actions. It was not enough for Tamela to simply become a vocalist. In the eyes of the people, she became a mirror, a constant reminder that even those who carry others are sometimes the ones who need to be carried themselves. However, here comes the most surprising portion. Despite the fact that her health gradually improved, the scandal did not go away. The volume increased. Questions were asked by fans in a direct manner. I don't understand why no one on her team stepped up earlier. In other words, was the image of being unshakable more important than her well-being, or were her boundaries respected? There was no anger directed toward Tamela. The system that she was surrounded by, the pressure to be flawless, the non-stop schedule, and the calm expectation that faith could maybe replace rest were all sources of anger for them. Also, this was no longer solely about her situation. It developed into a story about every single artist, every single pastor, and every single strong woman who had ever been advised to keep going when they should have stopped. Despite this, Tamela's spirit appeared to be making a comeback. One of the family's closest friends disclosed that she had resumed her writing career. It was not music at this point, but rather thoughts, reflections, and things that she had never before spoken out loud. She is beginning a new chapter, not just in terms of her health, but also in terms of her purpose, according to The Acquaintance. Due to the fact that Tamela has always sang about healing, fans were impacted by that experience. Now she was experiencing it in the here and now. On the other hand, the moment that genuinely won everyone's affection arrived in a stealthy manner. A short video was uploaded by Tamela Mann. The only thing that was heard was Tamela sitting up in bed with her eyes closed and whispering the words, "Take me to the..." There was no music and no fancy editing. Even though her voice was weak and practically fading away, it was still audible, and others were able to perceive strength in that unassuming murmur. Survival was heard by them. They listened to the testimony. From this point on, Tamela has chosen to remain out of the public glare in order to relax, heal, and prioritize serenity above pressure. Although the family has requested that they be allowed to maintain their privacy, they have assured fans that they will share her journey when she is ready and in her own words. In the meantime, supporters will continue to share their own experience. There has been no let-up in the use of the hashtag #HowIStandWithTamela. Due to the fact that this was not merely a hot story, it has grown. It evolved into a movement, serves as a wake-up call, and serves as a reminder that behind every powerful voice is a heart that is pounding. That requires attention as well. Now is the time to give back to Tamela if her music ever held you when you were broken, if her voice ever brought you closer to serenity, and if you experienced any of these things. Through the prayers you say, the words you speak, and the patience you show. Due to the fact that her story is still being written, it is true that she is not yet standing on stage, but even when she is not speaking, her voice is still guiding the way. Throughout her journey, religion has been the driving force. Now, however, it is also about speaking the truth, mending and selecting rest over appearance. Her heart was given to the entire world. At this moment, the world is protecting it with a gentle hand.